Dusk ran in liquid gold across the tops of the towering skyscrapers, the last beam of sunlight dying on strips of glass and steel. The city below gleamed in a deceptive hush, cinders reflecting brilliance, streets raked in elongated shadows, where passers-by hurried home or dawdled at pop-up markets. Amid traffic and the chatter of neon-lit bars, a solitary figure stood on a battered wooden box at the edge of a crowded square. The figure was tall, wiry, with hair the colour of tarnished brass. A violin bow was tucked under an arm while the other hand closed around the neck of the instrument. His name was Bandiel, though few in the world of mortals knew that. His face glimmered under the street lamp, as though light itself clung to his sharp cheekbones. When Bandiel started to play, pedestrians paused, halting in mid-stride, drawn by music that sounded far too pristine to come from dusty strings. Eerie chords climbed, soared, and shrank back again, weaving into the city rumble and pulling all ears from the nighttime bustle. A subtle glow fell over the crowd, trickling from the performer's chest as though something ethereal peeked through the threadbare fabric of his coat. He was no ordinary busker. Shadows danced around Bandiel's ankles, coiling like hungry serpents before dissolving under the lamplight. The onlookers, entranced, barely noticed the illusions flickering near their feet. If they did, they likely passed it off as stage flair or a trick of the mind. Satisfied with the effect, Bandiel ended his melody on a slow final note. The crowd let out a collective sigh and applause. His hat, lying on the ground, collected coins and small bills, tokens of appreciation for a spectacle none completely understood. A tall man in a trench coat ambled closer, a silent observer with an eye for the bizarre. The night breeze carried the smell of fried food and exhaust, blending with the stale undertone of the city's unending secrets. Bandiel offered a close-lipped smile as he knelt to gather his earnings. From his vantage point behind a curtain of loosely hanging hair, he saw between the feet of the onlookers. His gaze sought the cracks in the street, where labyrinthine tunnels stretched beneath the city's surface. Even after centuries among mortals, his senses remained partially attuned to cosmic undercurrents. A faint hum from below rumbled in his bones, reminding him that the world beneath was as alive as the one above. His story began in splendor. Once a guardian angel, radiant and purposeful, assigned to watch over humanity, but a fateful choice, an act of defiance he refused to regret, had cast him out. His wings had blackened, losing their brilliant feathered aura. Hatred still clawed at him from the memory of that expulsion, but necessity forced him to linger among mortals, hiding any sign of his celestial nature behind illusions. Only now, in these street performances, could he allow fragments of his old spark to leak through. To the crowd, it was mesmerizing showmanship. To Bandiel, it was a clandestine channel. He left the square with violin in hand, slipping between out-of-order vending machines and flickering streetlights. The rest of the city was drawn to neon-drenched boulevards, so he disappeared into the edges. He moved without speaking, crossing into quieter avenues. His footsteps eventually led him to a rotting building hidden in a tangle of neglected street signs. A faint luminescence haloed the broken windows. Even the darkness around him seemed uneasy, like a feral cat slinking away. A recessed door opened on squeaking hinges, revealing a cramped basement. Inside, a handful of people milled about folding tables piled with half-lit candles, city maps and magical paraphernalia. Some recognized him and offered polite nods. He acknowledged them before sliding toward a back wall, plastered with tattered posters from old circuses. The entire place stank of mold, old incense, and desperation. "Report," he said under his breath to a woman hunched over an expansive map pinned to a corkboard. Her name was Celia, an unregistered witch adept at illusions, nearly on par with Bandiel himself. Dressed in drab layers, she somehow managed to blend perfectly with the half-lit gloom of the space. "I've just returned from the catacombs," she replied. "Something is crawling around down there, Bandiel. You were right." It's been steadily growing, but I can't fully determine its shape or nature. Spiritual residue, perhaps." He hummed, stepping closer. The corners of his eyes held an otherworldly glow, though thoroughly tarnished. He placed a hand over the map where labyrinthine passages wove like veins beneath the city foundation. "There's a gathering of energy," he said, "an undercurrent forming. It's pulling in negative emotion, feeding off resentment, and with each performance I can sense it intensify." Celia frowned. "You don't think your illusions are fueling it, do you?" He shook his head slowly. "No, not directly, but they serve as cover. There are others in this city, others dethroned, others fallen who found each other here. Their resentment might be fueling this anomaly. My illusions keep us hidden from prying eyes so we can investigate. But someone else might be using the same smokescreen to brew something truly monstrous." She glanced at him warily. In his demeanor was a trace of regret that etched lines on his face. He had once guarded the world from precisely these ailments. Now, ironically, he stood at the center of a potential catastrophe. "Any instructions?" Bandiel studied the map. Life as an angel had given him infinite patience, but his newfound mortality introduced him to an urgent sense of time. "Keep tracking the undercurrent," he instructed. "If it starts to manifest physically, alert me right away. As for me, I'll do another show across town, near the abandoned subway entrance. That's where the energy is strongest right now." Celia dipped her head. Understood. Leaving the basement felt like surfacing from deep water. The city's clamoring heartbeat returned, car horns, laughter, and the occasional wail of a siren. Bandiel shoved his violin into its case, shoulders hunched as if weighed down by memories beyond a human lifespan. The streets blurred into long stretches of pavement. His illusions normally came alive in performance, but they were also his defense. A slight flick of his wrist could shift a watchful gaze away from him, cause a guard to lose interest, or persuade a camera in a shop window to glitch. People often heard of urban legends about the trickster violinist, but no one truly saw him unless he allowed it. He decided to make his way to the old Mellons subway station, a crumbling architectural relic, overshadowed by new steel-laced train lines. Dark arches beckoned from behind fencing plastered with graffiti. At midnight, a mere handful of onlookers usually ventured there. Lost wanderers, thrill-seeking teens, or those with questionable intentions. Tonight he wanted to attract not just an audience, but also something else lurking beneath. He halted at an open courtyard near the graffiti-stained entrance. Street lamps flickered in sickly yellow arcs. Half of them burned out. Only a trio of teenage skaters rolled about the cracked concrete. They paused when the tall stranger set down a violin case. One of them scoffed, but another found herself oddly rooted to the spot, her interest piqued by the way the lamplight wrapped around him. Bandiel removed the violin and placed it against his shoulder, bow at the ready. A first note echoed with a purity belying the grime around them. Spectral motes of light wove from the strings, swirling like glowing dust. The skaters gaped, stepping backward yet enthralled. A high-pitched resonance broke the hush, rhythmic and haunting. The illusions deepened. Lines of color traced the skate ramps, morphing them into luminous half-pipes. One of the teens involuntarily gasped as ethereal shapes seemed to spiral overhead, angelic silhouettes that melted into winged beasts. At that moment, the sealed subway gates thudded with echoes from below. Bandiel continued playing, carefully weaving illusions to hide the sound from any casual passers-by. Beneath the city, the sinister presence stirred. It pressed against the boundary of the catacombs, rattling rusted gates and summoning faint cries from the old tunnels. As the illusions rippled outward from his violin, Bandiel felt the tension snap. The entity down there recognized the disguised angel's presence and unleashed a wave of malice. From the darkness behind the fences came a low, rumbling growl. Bandiel's hand almost faltered on the strings. The illusions flickered for a fraction of a second, revealing malevolent red eyes peering through the chain link. He heard scraping metal and realized that one of the gates was being pried open. The music soared louder, frantic notes swirling to cloak the watchers and the unsuspecting skaters from the horror emerging. Two figures crept from the gloom, clad in ragged coats that brushed the ground. Their eyes gleamed with a hungry spark. Bandiel instinctively recognized them as wraith-like thralls, foot soldiers for something bigger. Their presence meant the entity had found conduits in the living world. He switched the melody, plucking quick staccato chords. The illusions flared, turning the air thick with twisted reflections, shapes that disturbed the thralls' movements and shifted their sense of space. One wrong turn, and they might topple back into the void. But these thralls were stubborn, and one managed to lunge forward. It wrestled the chain-link fence, aiming for the petrified skaters. A sharp chord from Bandiel's violin carved a shimmering ward in the air, a barrier that slammed the thrall aside. A spasm knocked the creature off balance, and it crashed into broken concrete. The other thrall hissed, coiling back into the shadows. The teenagers, finally unrooted from their trances, wasted no time. They scrambled away, boards squeaking as they fled. Bandiel let them go. They mattered less than what now threatened to burst from the Undercity. The battered thrall twisted, then launched itself again. He had no desire for prolonged confrontation out in the open, not with humans still within earshot. Another drawn-out note, this time thick with forbidden power, wrapped a glowing rope around the thrall's torso. The thrall roared and spat vile curses, but it was pinned. The illusions masked the scene from any unsuspecting onlookers, turning the courtyard into a milky swirl of half-formed images. Drawing a final, ear-splitting crescendo, Bandiel unleashed a pulse of light from the violin's core. The thrall disintegrated into a swirl of charcoal ash. The second thrall emitted a harsh hiss of fury and retreated through a jagged crack in the fence, vanishing into darkness. Exhaling to steady himself, Bandiel let the illusions drift away, returning the courtyard to its usual decay and graffiti. The oppressive presence below had subsided, but only slightly. This was just a testing strike. Something down there was gauging his power. An old enemy, or a new one set to exploit the city for its own ends. He clicked the violin case shut and hurried away. If tonight was any sign, the malevolence underneath was growing bolder. What if it was connected to others like him? Fallen angels nurtured resentment in the city's underbelly, forging unholy alliances. All of his illusions, all of his clandestine efforts to keep watch, might be inadvertently enabling a monstrous threat. The next day, Bandiel found his way to a dilapidated cafe near the wharf, arranged to look unremarkable for good reason. Inside sat a man named Kichiru, rumored to know the whereabouts of creatures that defied the mortal realm. A smoky haze hovered near the ceiling as patrons sucked on cheap cigarettes. Bandiel slid into the booth across from Kijuro without a word. The man wiped the corner of his mouth with a napkin, nodding in acknowledgement. "They say you're the one with the illusions," Kijuro said quietly. He had a raspy voice that suggested too many late nights. "You're also the one people call an outcast from up high." Bandiel folded his hands. "Rumors swirl like crows around the city, but I'm here for information, not small talk." Kijuro shrugged. "Information has a price, but if it's about the darkness below, I might be inclined to share a morsel. Something is stirring, night after night, in the old catacombs beneath the downtown district. People say the catacombs existed well before modern construction, used by older cults worshipping twisted gods. As the city grew, it sealed off the passageways, or so they claimed, but apparently they never fully sealed the evil housed there. Now, there's talk of a rift, a gateway feeding off despair." Bandiel listened carefully. He felt a slight spark of fear. The idea of a rift harnessing negative energies could lead to cataclysm. Looking at Kijuro, he asked, "Any knowledge about who's pulling the strings?" Another shrug, followed by a mirthless chuckle. "People rumor a group of fallen run the show. Some simply want to watch the city rot. Others planned to harness the black tide, twisting it into a weapon or a gateway to let something monstrous cross over. A hush settled between them as a waitress refilled coffee cups without meeting their eyes. After she left, Bandiel slipped Kijiro a folded bill. "Much appreciated," he muttered. "Stay safe." Kijiro examined the money. "Same to you, Angel." Bandiel left, conscious of the waitress's curious glance. Outside, the wharf air smelled of salt and pollution. He shielded his eyes from the late afternoon sun. He had to find a way to prevent disaster without letting the city discover the truth about him. Walking briskly, he formed a plan. Gather Celia and a few others who possessed enough magical skill to reinforce his illusions. The group would descend into the tunnels that night, hoping to unravel the source of the darkness before it expanded. Night draped the city in fluorescent colors. Bandiel, Celia, and 3 others stood on a rusted loading dock near the abandoned canal entrance that twisted into the sub-levels beneath the old part of town. The city's modern face felt distant here, overshadowed by archaic stone arches. Their breath echoed softly as they switched on pocket flashlights. Celia ran her fingers around a dull silver pendant. The others, Marcus, Jill, and a pot-bellied man named West, maintained a calm that belied their nervousness. "Maintain your illusions at all times," Bandiel said, voice low. "Use them to cloak our presence. The entity below can sense fear, but illusions should scramble its awareness of us." Marcus nodded, pulling up his hood. West let out a shaky breath. Their steps descended into slick corridors. Pipes dripped oily water onto the concrete, forming shallow puddles that mirrored their wavering lights. Strange scrawls covered the walls, graffiti turned cryptic. Occasionally, Celia lifted her hands in practiced gestures, weaving spells to dampen the echoes of their footsteps. As they went deeper, the walls transitioned from modern concrete to older stone. The corridor opened into a chamber with vaulted ceilings supported by columns etched with ancient glyphs. A stagnant pool of black water shimmered near the center, and an unsettling hush blanketed everything. Bandiel realized that illusions flickered at the edges of the chamber, but not from his own group. Someone else was layering illusions here, obfuscating sight in twisting shapes. He halted, raising a hand. In that instant, 4 wraith-like thralls emerged from behind a pillar. Their hollow eyes radiated malice. The group froze. They had illusions to remain hidden, but the illusions encasing this region had twisted in a way that allowed the thralls to see them. A grating laugh echoed from the darkness, and Celia nearly stumbled backward. More shapes stepped into the shimmering gloom, revealing themselves one by one, fallen angels, their wings clipped or blackened. Bandiel glanced across their faces, noticing raw hatred. One of them, tall and golden-eyed, spat words like venom. "Bandiel, once guardian, has come to meddle." Their leader stood at the center of the circle. A mass of swirling energy coiled around him, pulsing in time with an unseen heart. At first, the shadowed figure remained partially hidden by illusions. Then, as if deciding to reveal himself, he stepped forward. His face was porcelain pale, and 2 stumps on his back hinted at severed wings. Bandiel recognized him, Cathiel, an ancient comrade who had once served side by side with him in celestial realms. "Where?" Bandiel demanded, though the question seethed with regret. "You know what such malevolence can do to an already fragile city." Cathiel's grin was predatory. "We were cast out, brother. Our cosmic guardianship ended by a sentence we never asked for. But there is strength in darkness, power we can harness. We gather negative energies from the city's seething resentment. Fear, anger, desperation. Enough to rupture the boundary between worlds. We shall rule, or at least watch the mortal realm tear itself apart." The thralls hissed and circled. Celia and the others spread out. Bandiel clutched his violin case, wishing for a simpler solution. But it was too late for talk. He flicked open the case and raised the bow, letting illusions pour forth. Wisps of golden light threaded into the air, forging a protective arc around his allies. The thralls lunged, and illusions met them like razor wire, slicing through their intangible bodies. Roars filled the chamber. Cathiel crouched, swirling darkness into a tangible spear. He flung it at Bandiel, who dove aside, nearly losing his grip on the violin. Celia muttered incantations, generating mirror images of the group to confuse the thralls. Marcus wove illusions that streaked the air with brilliant flashes, disorienting the enemy. But the thralls kept coming, fueled by the well of black energy that pulsed near Cathiel. Bandiel realized that the swirling mass fueling them was a nexus of negative emotion. Likely the gateway, and Cathiel was channeling its raw power. If they didn't close it soon, no amount of illusions would hide the devastation. He steadied himself and placed the violin under his chin. Drawing the bow across the strings, he unleashed a litany of chords that reverberated in unnatural ways. The sound glowed with reminders of what he once was. The illusions coalesced into near-solid forms, ghostly wings shielding him from the next barrage of dark spears. The music soared, throbbing with a faint echo of celestial might. The thralls faltered under the onslaught of illusions that forced them to see glimpses of a once holy radiance. Some stumbled back, their snarls turning into shrieks. Celia directed shining arcs of her own illusions to sever them from the tether to the nexus. Meanwhile, Cathiel fought to hold the energy together, channeling fresh waves of black force. He roared, and cracks formed in the chamber's columns, threatening collapse. Tension built as two powers collided. Bandiel's illusions, ephemeral yet rooted in a once divine calling, and Cathiel's manipulations of the city's darkest impulses. Marcus and Jill harnessed ribbons of color and shape, weaving illusions that entrapped a cluster of thralls. West conjured glimmers of starlight, drawing on arcane symbols etched on the floor. With each thrall vanquished, the swirling nexus dimmed, but Cathiel tapped into an ocean of hatred left behind by centuries of mortal suffering. Bandiel's violin wail grew explosive. Each stroke of the bow summoned louder harmonies powered by the lingering shards of his angelic grace. The illusions expanded outward, forging intangible walls that pinned Cathiel in place. Shadows hissed and sputtered, and the swirling nexus began to quiver. A hairline fracture appeared in the ephemeral surface of the black mass. Fissures of golden light broke through, traveling like molten cracks across the darkness. Cathiel bellowed, "You think we're doomed to serve, Bandiel? Even in condemnation you cling to guardianship. Why protect mortals who cast your kind aside without understanding?" Bandiel's own resentment flared, but he remembered his core purpose. Even after losing heaven, some part of him believed in protecting life. This city, for all its flaws, needed saving. "I may have fallen, but I have not forsaken everything," he replied. "Your rage isn't worth annihilating countless souls." With a final chord, he let the illusion surge forward, piercing into the nexus. A brilliant eruption of light swallowed Cathiel's outraged roar. Darkness splintered, releasing shrieking echoes that ricocheted off the chamber walls. The swirling blackness caved in on itself like a dying star. Thunderous cracks echoed, columns groaned, and stones tumbled from the ceiling. Celia yelled for everyone to retreat. Somberness dripped from Bandiel's face as he watched Cathiel vanish within the collapsing illusions, consumed by searing energy. Then the real world intruded. The catacombs began to quake, dislodging stones and toppling pillars. The group scrambled toward the exit. One of the thralls lunged in a final desperate attack, only to shatter against an unearthly barrier that flared around Bandiel. Moments later, they emerged into a hallway just as a thunderous crash sealed the chamber behind them. Dust billowed, choking the corridor. Once the rumbling subsided, an uneasy stillness settled in. Filtered droplets of water tapped around them. The gateway was destroyed, or at least sealed off for the time being. The illusions that concealed its darkness had been replaced by an enormous pile of rubble. Whatever Cathiel had become, he was gone, or hiding, overshadowed by the remains of his own destructive design. The city overhead was safe, another night. Wiping sweat and grime from her brow, Ciri nodded. "We did it," she whispered, though her voice shook. "Aurora!" Marcus and Jill panted, relieved. West fell to his knees, pressing a hand to his chest in exhaustion. Glancing around, Bandiel realized that protection could be fleeting. Rage and sorrow didn't vanish just because a single gateway closed. Mortals had an uncanny ability to birth fresh darkness. He had prevented a tragedy, but the city's undercurrent of negative emotion was not so easily quelled. "We go back," he said, after his breath steadied. "We rest and we remain vigilant. The city still has many shadows." They limped through the tunnel and eventually ascended rusting ladders. The labyrinth spat them out onto the street, where a distant siren wailed and traffic sloshed through puddles. It appeared to the outside world that nothing unusual had happened. By the time they emerged, the eastern horizon already hinted at sunrise, casting a pale glow across the skyline. New day, new illusions. In the aftermath, Bandiel continued his life, performing on forgotten street corners, side avenues, and overlooked plazas. His illusions brought fleeting wonder to jaded inhabitants of an ever-growing metropolis. Yet behind every chord and swirl of light was a watchful eye, still attuned to underlying shadows. In the end, Bandiel remained a disgraced guardian, balancing on a line between performer and protector. With patience and timeless resolve, he vowed to cloak other lurking evils, standing as a shield, albeit a tarnished one, against the next dark secret that might rise under the city's unsuspecting feet.